everyone, it's Joshua Pocus. Another week and time to talk about my weekly watches from October 2nd through October 8th. Let me know down in the comments below what you have been watching, whether it's strictly horror and Halloween for the month of October or just a mix of everything. So starting up, we got, whether I recommend or don't recommend, we got Hocus Pocus on Monday. I really enjoyed this one. I'm not a huge fan, but I do recommend it for light horror films or just Halloween films that's just good for the family. Then I watched Hocus Pocus 2. This one I wasn't quite as big of a fan of. Some of the main characters not very compelling, and some of the main actors of the witches returning are just a little bit of a mix on their roles. One overdoes it, one underdoes it, and the one other is right in the middle, but ultimately it wasn't for me. And next we got the Three Calaveras from Disney and Disney wartime era, and I do not really enjoy this just for the way it goes about different anthology stories, and it's not super memorable having watched it again for the sake of the rankings I'm going to do. Fun and Fancy Free is next of the Disney wartime era, and this one was a little bit more better, has a little bit more of a familiar taste, with one of the stories being based on Jack of Beanstalk, but with Disney characters, so that was alright. I don't necessarily recommend much of these unless you're just showing them to younger kids or whatnot with the Disney wartime era. But next up we got Melody Time. This one was a little bit better than even Fun and Fancy Free, but still wasn't one of the greater Disney animated films. And then leading up with that, we have The Adventures of Ichabod and Mr Toad. And this one was a duology of different stories. Ichabod, I mean, is sort of the Sleepy Hollow type of Halloween story, and Mr Toad having committed a crime and having to undo his name based on what he was accused for. And that one was one of the better ones, so I do recommend Ichabod and Mr Toad, especially since it's a little bit more of a Halloween one around this time of year. Next up we got Mr. Harrigan's Phone, one that I did enjoy a little bit more. A Stephen King adaptation based on a novel that I actually really enjoyed. I do have a full review on that, but I just do enjoy the chemistry you get between the two actors with Craig and Mr. Harrigan and their relationship. And even though some critics hate it, I beg to differ on that one. And that leads into next film is Halloween, one that I liked a little bit more upon this rewatch, the second time I've ever seen this film, and I'm still not a major fan on this, but it's still rather good for its writing, and at least one of the better Halloween franchise ones as we lead up into Halloween Ends this coming Friday. And Halloween 2 it dropped a little bit on its rating this time around. It's still alright, one of the maybe better ones of the franchise as a whole, but still not super compelling, and some of the hospital environment feels very empty with the stakes that it has when no one else is in the hospital really besides the few doctor characters that there are there. And next up we have Werewolf by Night, one that was a Disney Plus special of Marvel, and I really like the 1930s Halloween type of feel and just going in a little bit darker direction, and it was a lot more fresh for the MCU that we haven't really gotten recently, and I really do love the surprise villain that they included within it. And next up we have Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Now this one, I like the ideas, but not so much the execution of some of the characters or whatnot, but the theme song that they had based on the mask and everything, I was engaged with those specific scenes, but unfortunately they were a little bit few and far between, but it was still alright, just under the means of that, but I wouldn't hurt the score based on the lack of Michael Myers. But that leaves that. Next we have Halloween 4, one that I did enjoy just for the ideas of, there were some slower moments, just like some of the other Halloween movies, but some of the fight sequences or what they do with Dr. Loomis and bringing back Jamie as the daughter of Laurie Strode was a lot more intriguing than I would have expected for this movie, and so I was a little bit more surprised by this than I would have expected, especially with that twist ending that just changed different moments than what I expected for. And then coming to a close with the movies of this week, we got Halloween 5. This one wasn't a good follow-up with Halloween 4, but it was still alright with some different moments here and there. Just Dr. Loomis going crazy at sometimes, but overall it felt slow, and some of the manners of when they're getting chased by Michael Myers, and some moments I just get bothered by how they choose to follow up with the story. And finishing off the week of just the movies before I go into the shows, we got Father of Bride. Yes, I got into a little bit of a comedy mood just with Steve Martin after watching Only Murders in the Building, which I still really enjoy and recommend on Hulu. But only Father of the Bride with Steve Martin, I wasn't as big a fan of this as I was hoping. Steve Martin being the father, and some of the character development with him is very absent, because he seems a little bit cynical about his daughter getting married, and always judgmental at first about who she's being with. And I know there could be some truth to how that is, because the anxiety of the father losing his daughter, essentially. But they took it to some extremes that took the comedy element out of it, and so some of the elements with that just didn't work so well as the drama worked within the film itself, especially when you're getting to the end and you're getting the sweethearted moments. Finishing up with the shows that I watched this past week, we got The Patient episode 7. This one stars Steve Carell and Domhnall Gleeson over on Hulu, and it's about this patient that has a obsession to kill people and traps his psychologist, who is Steve Carell in this case, that he traps him in his house, chains him to the bed, and so they're going through the psychotic situation. The last couple episodes weren't as good as the first so many, but this episode 7 was a little bit better on the means of, it looks like it's gonna head toward a conclusion, but some parts of the flashbacks they go over aren't as compelling, or some parts like feel a little bit filler. But ultimately I hope it all comes together in a nice close, because I'm really liking this series so far in general. And we got She-Hulk episode 8. Now this one I wasn't huge on, despite the inclusion of Daredevil, which I do like the character for, having watched Daredevil season 1 for the first time. Ultimately, the show still doesn't have great writing. The lawsuit court cases don't blend well with how Daredevil is integrated in. And this may be a hot take, but I just didn't like the episode overall. Like, Daredevil had great moments, but the rest of it wasn't all too hot on what they're going for. And going on the last few episodes before we get into the best and worst of the month, we got the Kaminsky Method episode 4 through 5 of season 1. Now this isn't a top priority show, but this is a rewatch of the Kaminsky Method that I really enjoy the older culture aspect of it, what they're doing with the older generation, and Michael Douglas playing this acting coach, and just going over life and just different lessons and how they're integrating it is really well intertwined, and it has some pretty good comedy. It's not great all the time, but it's still feeling very natural in real life, which is something that it's very attractive based on that degree. But, so that's everything I've watched, but the best of week is Mr. Harrigan's Phone, Stephen King's adaptation that I just like more than critics. And then we got the worst of the week, The Three Calaveras, and on Disney's wartime era, maybe the worst. I just have to gather that list together, but ultimately I wasn't huge on The Three Calaveras. And so let me know your best and worst of the week that you've been watching and what you're planning on watching for the rest of the month. But be sure to like this video, subscribe to stay tuned